insurance fraud. Vinny, what do you know about this story?
So, oh man, it's just The View. Just a person, the Sunny Hostin that we all love from one of my favorite shows on The View. And it's always, Tom, what'd you always say? It's always the people that always do the pointing. And it always comes back to them, all right? So when you said, this is the largest RICO case ever filed in the state of New York. You guys wrap that around your brain. That's bigger than the mafia case.
And he gave me some surprising revelations about my family history. You know, I was really reluctant. I don't know how you felt when you did it, Whoopi, but I was really reluctant to do it because I just sensed that there could be something in my family history that would be disappointing. Negative, yes. I thought I was going to have that kind of moment. And Skip had asked me to do it for a long time. And I finally decided to do it because I thought it'd be helpful for my children and my children's children to know what their real history was, you know?
Sunny, get in here. I mean, I agree with mostly everything that's been said. I mean, we know that, you know, only about 31% of Americans trust our healthcare system. We have a terrible healthcare system. And you know, doctors suffer because of big corporations as well. Doctors that want to do good, like my husband, you know, operates on someone even though they don't have insurance and then has to sue health insurance companies.
I think it's actually pretty interesting that my husband and I have shared roots.
Yeah.
So I do appreciate that. And I think it's great for our children to know this information. I guess it's a fact of life that this is how some people made their living, on the backs of others.
It's like the mafia one was number one. This one takes it over. So he was scamming insurance companies from taxi drivers, Uber drivers, and Lyft drivers. He was performing unnecessary surgeries and then providing fraudulent medical services in exchange for the kickbacks.
Don't believe Trump.
Yeah.
And what he said is that Trump has never really wanted to be president. He actually has always wanted to be king. And he also says that his plan this time is to first play king on television. And if we believe he is already king, we will be likelier to let him govern as a king. So don't believe him, because right now what we're seeing is he's waving his scepter, his king scepter. Yeah. Congestion pricing is gone.
Well, I think date night with Sunny and her husband are being a little interested. How'd it go today? Oh, it was terrible. I had to read this legal statement into a camera and I'd do what they told me. And her husband's like, so did I. I had the same day. Yeah. Now, he's just accused, and this accused in a lawsuit after some time of investigation could ultimately become a federal indictment. That's the apparent path this is on. We'll wait and see. Yeah. But it does not look well when your name ends up with 200 people in a RICO investigation.
Listen up, guys, because this story about Sunny Hostin is about to shake the View's foundation to its core. Fresh sources reveal that while she's been lecturing America about morality on national television, the FBI has been building a case that'll make your head spin. Think about it. For years, Sunny's been positioning herself as the voice of justice and equality on The View, but behind the scenes, something much darker was happening. The FBI isn't just looking into minor discrepancies. We're talking about millions of dollars that seemingly vanished into thin air. The really fascinating part? While Sunny's been calling out corruption on air, investigators have been following a money trail that leads right back to her doorstep. Those perfectly polished legal opinions she shares on TV, they might have been covering up something way more sinister. Sources close to the investigation say this isn't just about missing money. It's about a pattern of financial misconduct that spans years. And trust me, once you hear the details, you'll never look at The View's legal expert the same way again. Breaking down the timeline of this investigation reveals something nobody's talking about. The FBI didn't just stumble onto this case. They've been quietly gathering evidence since Sunny's husband, Emanuel Hostin, started showing some very suspicious patterns in his medical practice. Sources from within the investigation say Emanuel wasn't just performing unnecessary surgeries. He was targeting specific groups of patients. We're talking about Uber drivers, taxi operators, and delivery workers who were pushed into procedures they didn't need, all for insurance payouts. But here's what makes this story really interesting. While Sunny was using her platform to advocate for working-class Americans, her husband was allegedly exploiting these same people through his medical practice. The way they structured these schemes? It's giving major organized crime vibes. Multiple insurance companies have been cooperating with the FBI, providing documentation that shows a pattern so obvious, it's shocking nobody caught it sooner. The amount of money involved? It's making previous medical fraud cases look like pocket change. The way this scheme allegedly operated exposes something even more disturbing. Emanuel wasn't working alone. He had a whole network of clinics and medical professionals involved. And guess who helped structure these businesses? That's right, his wife, the former federal prosecutor. Industry experts say Sunny's legal background wasn't just impressive TV credentials. It potentially helped create a sophisticated fraud operation. Those medical clinics weren't just performing unnecessary surgeries. They were set up in a way that made tracking the money almost impossible. Think about the irony here. While Sunny's been preaching about justice on The View, she might have been using her legal expertise to help hide millions in fraudulent insurance claims. The way these clinics were structured? It shows someone with intimate knowledge of how to avoid detection. Even more fascinating is how they allegedly targeted specific communities. Those passionate speeches Sunny gave about protecting vulnerable populations? They take on a whole new meaning when you realize who their medical practices were exploiting. Let's talk about those mysterious real estate purchases that caught the FBI's attention. While everyone was focused on Sunny's TV career, her family was quietly amassing a property empire that raised serious questions about their income sources. Sources close to the investigation revealed that the Hostins weren't just buying properties. They were creating a complex web of ownership that made tracing funds nearly impossible. We're talking about shell companies, offshore accounts, and business structures that would make a financial crimes expert's head spin. The really telling part? Many of these properties were purchased in cash, right around the same time their medical clinics were reporting record profits from these questionable surgeries. The timing isn't just suspicious, it's practically screaming for attention. Multiple real estate agents have come forward with stories about how Emanuel would show up with briefcases full of cash, while Sunny used her celebrity status to deflect any questions about their funding sources. The way they played good cop/bad cop with these transactions? Pure calculated genius. The impact on their victims is where this story gets really dark. These weren't just random insurance scams. They were allegedly targeting specific immigrant communities and gig economy workers who couldn't afford to question medical authority. Sources say Emanuel's clinics would specifically advertise in areas where rideshare drivers congregated, offering free consultations that almost always led to unnecessary surgical procedures. The pressure tactics used on these vulnerable workers? It's enough to make your skin crawl. One former patient, speaking anonymously, described how they were told their minor back pain required immediate surgery, only to be left with permanent complications and mountains of debt. And this wasn't an isolated incident. Investigators have found hundreds of similar cases. Meanwhile, Sunny was using her platform on The View to discuss healthcare inequality, all while allegedly profiting from a system that exploited the very people she claimed to champion. The level of hypocrisy here? It's absolutely staggering. The paper trail leading to their offshore accounts tells us everything we need to know about how sophisticated this operation was. While Sunny was playing the role of passionate legal expert on TV, she was allegedly helping structure one of the biggest medical fraud schemes in New York history. Multiple financial experts who've reviewed the case say the way they moved money through different jurisdictions shows someone with intimate knowledge of how to avoid detection. Those years Sunny spent as a federal prosecutor? Looks like they might have taught her exactly how to stay one step ahead of investigators. The banking records that investigators uncovered will make every financial crimes expert gasp. Think about it. While she's been sitting on The View discussing current events, her family's empire was allegedly processing millions in fraudulent claims through a network so complex it took the FBI years to unravel. The sheer scale of this operation makes previous medical fraud cases look amateur. Even their legitimate business ventures are now under scrutiny. Every investment, every property purchase, every business partnership is being examined for potential connections to these fraudulent funds. The way they allegedly laundered these millions shows a level of sophistication that's stunning even veteran investigators. Sources say they weren't just running it through typical channels. They created an entire network of seemingly legitimate businesses to clean the money. From medical supply companies to property management firms, each business was strategically structured to appear independent while actually functioning as part of their larger scheme. The genius part? Most of these businesses provided actual services, making it nearly impossible to separate legitimate income from fraudulent funds. What's really fascinating is how they use Sunny's celebrity status as cover. Who would suspect a prominent TV personality, known for her legal expertise and moral standings, of being involved in such an elaborate fraud? It was the perfect smokescreen. Even their charitable donations are now under investigation. Those generous contributions to community organizations? Investigators believe they might have been another layer of their money laundering operation, using good deeds to hide bad money. The medical practice's internal documents expose a system so calculated it's making investigators head spin. Emanuel wasn't just performing unnecessary surgeries. He had created an entire protocol for identifying and targeting potential victims. Sources from within the practice reveal they had actual quotas for how many procedures needed to be performed each month. Staff members were allegedly incentivized to push patients toward more expensive treatments, regardless of medical necessity. The pressure put on vulnerable patients? It's absolutely chilling. The internal memos that just leaked will make every medical professional's blood run cold. Think about how they allegedly selected their targets. Rideshare drivers with minor injuries from long hours behind the wheel. Delivery workers with slight strains from carrying packages. These weren't just random patients. They were specifically chosen because they were least likely to question medical authority or have resources to fight back. Meanwhile, Sunny was using her platform to discuss healthcare reform, all while potentially profiting from one of the most exploitative medical schemes New York has ever seen. The View's producers are in complete panic mode now that this story's breaking. Sources from inside the show say they're scrambling to figure out how to handle having their legal expert potentially involved in one of the biggest fraud cases of the year. What's really interesting is how Sunny's been acting behind the scenes at the show. While maintaining her usual composed demeanor on camera, insiders say she's been making frantic phone calls during every break, speaking in hushed tones about documentation and contingency plans. Even more telling? The way she's been subtly shifting her on-air perspectives about white-collar crime. Watch recent episodes closely. Notice how she's suddenly becoming more sympathetic toward defendants in financial cases? Those aren't random opinions. They're calculated statements potentially laying groundwork for her own defense. Her co-hosts are reportedly walking on eggshells, unsure how to interact with someone who might be under federal investigation. Joy Behar was overheard asking producers if they should avoid discussing any topics related to financial crimes or medical fraud. The FBI's investigation into their real estate holdings reveals something nobody's talking about. Those luxury properties scattered across New York weren't just investments. They were allegedly part of an elaborate scheme to hide fraudulent profits. Sources close to the investigation say Emanuel would purchase properties through different shell companies, each one strategically created to obscure the money's origin. But here's where Sunny's legal expertise allegedly came into play. These companies were structured in a way that made them appear completely legitimate on paper. The property documents investigators uncovered will make real estate experts lose their minds. What's fascinating is how they reportedly used these properties. Some were rented out to medical professionals connected to their clinics, creating a perfect closed loop of money movement. Others were used as collateral for loans that helped further obscure the source of their funds. Even their primary residence raises questions. That multi-million-dollar mansion they bought? The purchase history is so complex it took investigators months just to trace the actual ownership. The way they allegedly handled their clinic's insurance billing exposes a level of sophistication that's stunning federal investigators. Sources say they weren't just submitting fraudulent claims. They had created an entire system to make unnecessary procedures appear legitimate. Medical billing experts who've reviewed the case say the documentation was meticulous. Every procedure was backed by perfectly crafted paperwork that made questioning the medical necessity nearly impossible. The attention to detail in covering their tracks? It's almost artistic. The billing codes they used to hide their scheme will leave insurance investigators speechless. Think about this. While Sunny was discussing legal ethics on national television, her husband's practice was allegedly creating fake medical histories to justify surgeries that patients didn't need. The contrast between her public persona and these allegations? It's mind-blowing. Even their clinic staff were reportedly trained to use specific language in patient files that would make insurance approvals automatic. The system was so well designed that it took years for investigators to spot the patterns. The impact on The View's credibility is where this story takes another fascinating turn. Sources from ABC say executives are frantically reviewing every legal opinion Sunny's ever given on air, worried about how this investigation might affect the show's reputation. What's really telling is how quickly her co-hosts' attitudes have shifted. While they're maintaining a united front on camera, behind the scenes, there's serious concern about how long they've been sitting next to someone potentially involved in such an elaborate fraud scheme. Whoopi Goldberg reportedly pulled producers aside after learning about the investigation, questioning how they could have missed the red flags. The fact that their legal expert might have been using her knowledge to allegedly help orchestrate such a scheme? It's raising serious questions about the show's vetting process. Even guest hosts are now hesitant about appearing alongside Sunny. Nobody wants to risk being associated with what's potentially becoming one of the biggest medical fraud cases in recent history. The way Sunny's been handling questions about her husband's practice shows just how calculated their approach to this whole situation is. During recent interviews, she's been carefully laying groundwork, dropping subtle hints about the challenges medical practices face with insurance companies. Industry insiders say her media strategy isn't random. It's a carefully orchestrated attempt to control the narrative before the FBI makes their investigation public. Every comment about healthcare costs, every discussion about medical insurance, it's all potentially part of their defense strategy. The PR strategy documents that just leaked will make crisis managers gasp. What's particularly fascinating is how she's using her legal expertise to craft statements that appear sympathetic while actually building potential defense arguments. Those casual comments about insurance companies targeting doctors? They're not innocent observations, they're calculated talking points. Meanwhile, Emanuel's medical practice has been quietly restructuring, moving assets and changing ownership structures in ways that make tracking funds even more complicated. The timing of these changes? It's like watching a chess player set up their board before a major match. The final piece of this puzzle shows just how deep this alleged scheme really goes. While everyone's focused on the medical fraud aspect, investigators have uncovered potential connections to larger organized crime networks that nobody saw coming. Sources close to the investigation reveal that Emanuel's clinics weren't operating in isolation. They were potentially part of a larger network of medical practices all engaging in similar schemes. The way these clinics coordinated their activities? It's giving serious RICO case vibes. The connections investigators just uncovered will shake New York's medical community to its core. But here's what really makes this story explosive. While Sunny's been positioning herself as a champion of justice on The View, she might have been using her legal knowledge to help structure one of the most sophisticated medical fraud operations the FBI has ever seen. The impact on their reputation is already showing. Speaking engagements are being canceled, book deals are being put on hold, and their social circle is quickly shrinking. Even their children's private school is reportedly discussing how to handle the situation with other parents. As this investigation continues to unfold, one thing's becoming crystal clear. The image Sunny projected on national television couldn't be further from what was allegedly happening behind the scenes. The former federal prosecutor who made a career out of prosecuting financial crimes? She might have been using that exact knowledge to help orchestrate one. The real irony here? All those times Sunny lectured viewers about ethics and morality on The View might come back to haunt her in court. Because when you position yourself as a moral authority while potentially running a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme, that's not just hypocrisy, it's evidence of intent.